Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Erwan Le Corre is the founder of Movenat, a synthesis of his long-term passion for real-life physical competency, his love of movement and nature, his extensive knowledge of physical education history, and his personal philosophy of life. Until his teenage years, Erwan's only physical education came from judo and exploring the world around him. In 2008, while living, training, and instructing in Brazil, he worked on synthesizing his knowledge, experience, methods, and principles into the creation of an entirely new training and coaching system, which is where Movenat was born. Erwan has been featured in Men's Health in an inspiring article about himself and Movenat, written by none other than New York Times bestselling author Christopher McDougall. Outside Magazine also released another feature-length article about Erwan and Movenat. The magazine ranked Paleo-fitness #1 of their top health and fitness trends of 2010, and Movenat as the leading force behind this movement. Erwan Le Corre, what an honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Well, Casey, thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And thank you for a brilliant introduction.
Absolutely. Thanks for having a brilliant life. I'm glad we're having this conversation. We almost didn't because you almost once died of malaria. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, my God, yes. Well, it was soon after I had moved to the U.S. to start teaching Movenat in the U.S. And I got invited to a trip to Tanzania, and I got malaria there, which I didn't know, because then I flew to London, and in London I started to really feel very unwell. And then at first I thought it was a cold. Then I thought, looks like the flu. And literally I had to do a 2-day workshop instruction, only instructor, a group of probably about 40 people in the summer of London, while having a terrible flu and having to do all the physical demonstrations, you name it, all the jumps, the moving on all fours, the sprints, the muscle ups, this and that. And while, having high fever, right, and feeling very weak, only to end up in the emergency room maybe 2 days later when it became even worse. So malaria is no joke, and it felt like I was about to die. I was severely dehydrated. I couldn't drink anything, couldn't eat anything, and I was shaking and shivering. And finally, I told my friend who was hosting me, it's more than just a flu. Something is wrong. Anyways, I got very well taken care of, and I recovered, and that's the story.
Wow. That's pretty crazy. Something a lot of people would never experience. It was back in 2014, I believe, that somebody told me what a podcast was. And I remember, kind of going on the computer and trying to look up things that maybe I would be interested in. And the first podcast I ever looked up was called Rewild Yourself by Daniel Vitalis. And
oh, yeah.
And you have been on his show twice, at least twice from what I know. And you were one of his very, very first guests. And it's really interesting to go back in time and, think about the concepts that I learned from that show, that like sunlight was good for you and you should get fresh air and moving naturally is very important. And all of these things that now I know are totally true in health and fitness, they were kind of new to me at that time. And to go back and listen to some of your original episodes, I mean, you've had this thing nailed for a very long time. What introduced you to the concept of Movenat and proper human movement?
Yeah, so you're right to point out that, it's not my first rodeo. I've been at it for a very long time, and I was training that way and basically also living this lifestyle, more natural lifestyle, before the internet was even a thing, let alone social media or podcast that came much later. You mentioned Daniel Vitalis is doing a great job also at inviting people to rewild their life, which is basically the same idea as Movenat, natural movement. And he actually came and trained with us and become certified with us. And so it's been also part of his journey after that. But yeah, originally and still to this date, it was never just about movement or natural movement. It was never just about real world physical capability, which is for sure our emphasis. This is what we teach. We have a certification. We teach people how to move naturally with efficiency, how to structure their training, etc. But from day one, remember as early as, well, of course, my time in Brazil and before in France, but when I taught my very first official workshops back in 2009 in the woods of West Virginia, I taught proper breathing, nasal, diaphragmatic, slow breathing. I taught obviously natural movement. I taught being barefoot, which now is called Erwan, or wearing minimal shoes. I taught people to eat local, seasonal, unprocessed food, to fast. Like, for instance, the last day of training was very hard and was all done on a fasted state. Taught people about the importance of sleep, of sun exposure, and whatnot. So my point is that everything that has later on become a niche, become a food function, earthing, fasting, cold exposure, all of that, it was all part of the original natural movement lifestyle. So what was my influence behind that? It started with, I guess, a mindset of my early childhood, where my dad was pushing me already to just, suck up the whatever conditions, fear. If I was climbing a tree, was encouraging me to climb trees or rocks or swim underwater or jump over an obstacle, and to also just be able to play outside all the time, regardless of the weather, including in the cold. So it was kind of old school mentality of, you're a kid, you're supposed to be in the street or in the woods or outside and play and challenge yourself and become strong and capable and confident in the process. Later on, I also started to just think of where this could take me if I was to keep learning and practicing and pushing, and I've had diverse experiences, and I've synthesized it all into what's called Movenat today.
That's amazing. I mean, the list of lifestyle practices that you just named, we have done individual episodes about all of those things: the structure of the foot, going barefoot, grounding with the earth, getting fresh air and sunlight, but never all in the same, in the same episode. It's amazing that you were able to put all of those things together. How should humans move? When we think about natural movement, what things should we be thinking about?
Well, first off, to understand that people, your ancestors, our common ancestors, were obviously physically active. They were living in nature, very close to nature, in nature, with nature. And obviously they had to move. It was not an option. And that was long before they had gyms or fitness programs, or even having to somehow motivate themselves to be physically active. So what was their reality back then was that if you didn't move, then you had a problem, and you could not survive, or you could not be useful to the community you belong to. Right? A lot of physical tasks had to be done, starting with walking and carrying things, being outside, stepping over, under, through obstacles, all kind of natural movements. So that's the origin. And it's just like other animal species. You think of any wild animal, a dolphin in the ocean, an eagle in the sky or up a mountain lion, a wild horse. They all have their own natural movement. So what's their own natural movement? It's not individual, spontaneous natural movement, whatever you want it to be. Well, not at all. The dolphins move like dolphins do. The eagles move like eagles do. The wild horses move like while horses do in nature, as a way to stay alive, as a way to stay safe, as a way to also have offspring and keep being alive as a species. So the question is, what is natural movement to us human beings as a species? And then the answer is very easy. You look at the kind of movements that people who still live close to nature, hunter-gatherers, do, or what simply all kids universally, regardless of ethnicity, culture, gender, all of those identity considerations. Look at what all young kids do spontaneously without any instruction. They move on all fours, they roll, they stand up, they get back down, they walk, they start to run, they balance, they start to jump, they start to hang, they start to climb, they start to move things around, to lift them, to carry them, to throw them, to catch them. They do all of the natural movements. And that is without any adult telling them what to do. So basically, it's a natural drive. It's a natural physical education program that they do by instinct. Okay. So that's what natural movement is to us human beings. And if you look at those movements, you understand that all of them could prove literally vital to your survival in a challenging situation. In order to escape a challenging situation, and you may ask firefighters, they don't do handstands, they don't do tricks, they have to run, they have to climb a ladder, they have to jump over an obstacle, they have to lift and drag or carry somebody to save lives. Those natural movements, those skills, they are vital. So when there's a problem and you need a physical response, you are going to have to do some kind of natural movement always. So that's what we are supposed to do. That's what all human beings are supposed to do. Means it should be part of their behavior, their physical behavior. Of course, we can also dance. We can do like funky movements, creative movements, all kinds of exercises with machines, exercises with tools and devices, and there's all kind of things that we can create, programs that we can create to be physically active. But what's the basis of our physical activity? It's natural movement. All specialized sports are born out of natural movement. If you play soccer or tennis, you'll have to run. What is tennis or ping pong if not catching and then throwing something, an object, with a tool? But the idea is that you are moving, you're running, you're stepping, you're catching, you're throwing, all kind of sports where you're going to have to basically have that foundation of natural movement in you in order to perform in a very specialized sports. All specialized sports that are physical, they are born out of some natural movement ability that comes from evolution, and that is universal to all human beings. So that's the beauty of it.
I love that you mentioned the kiddos. I see it in the playground near my house all the time. These kids, they can deep squat and hang and they run everywhere. Like, you can't teach running form as good as these kids just already know how to do it barefoot through sand and grass and all that stuff. What makes us lose that ability over time?
There's a lot of variables. I would say the first reason why we lose those abilities, obviously, is disuse. We stop moving those ways, or we never really move a lot those ways. And that has a lot to do with parenting, actually. It has a lot to do with being a young child. Obviously, you're taken care of normally or typically by your parents or by whoever is taking care of you. The question is, what is their physical behavior? Because they're showing you or not showing you what healthy natural movement is. So if you have parents who basically don't move much, they don't spend much time outside, or when they do, it's mostly walking a bit or sitting, but you'd never see them climb things, just, jump off things, moving all fours, lifting, carrying things. None of those movements are part of their physical behavior and movement repertoire. So basically, you, as a young kid who's paying attention, both consciously and mostly unconsciously, it's never part of the example that you receive. So it's all of a sudden, if you see other kids moving and they want to move just like you, you're a young kid, you want to do all these movements by instinct, but at the same time, you never see adults around you doing it. So what's the message there? The message is that, well, it's in fact useless to do that. And that idea is reinforced by the fact that typically adults that don't move tend to also want to restrict kids' movement. They want to tell them, don't do that, be still, you're going to hurt yourself, or it's only when we're at the playground for 10 minutes or 20 minutes while I'm, sitting, looking at my phone. And that's the only time you'll have the permission to behave that way, to be free of your movement, to hang and yell and run and be wild and do crazy things with your movement, just feeling free. They're not crazy things. They're actually very sane and very healthy. But the rest of the time, you shouldn't do any of that. Not inside the house, not outside because the weather is not nice, or because the neighborhood is not safe, or whatever, because you're going to hurt yourself, because then you're going to ruin your pants or something. But when we were kids, that was the opposite. Me, it was, what are you doing inside? The weather is nice, just go outside. Just go play outside. And that implied we would go and play outside. We wouldn't have any electronics. So we would have to use our imagination, and we also would have to listen to our instinct. So that could be playing tag, that could be playing seek and hide and seek, or whatever. The idea was we were playing those natural games that involved natural movement, exploration, challenge. Hey, who could climb up there? Who could jump off that? This is what you need as a kid, the environment. And if on top of that, your parents give you permission, or if they even show you some example, because that's also what they do, then it's very powerful. If it's the opposite, if they don't never show you that example, on top of that, they prevent you, they try to restrict you from doing that, then that's the number one reason why you lose that ability, because you don't think that it has any value. You have to wait that you're taught proper exercise. Like, okay, this is how you do proper biceps curls. This is how you do proper whatever. But you've completely dismissed what was there originally, ready to go, ready to develop, ready to be strong, ready to be capable. And that's the reason. That's a social construct, actually.
Mm. Wow, it's so interesting on the one hand that humans can do so much with technology, and here we are having this conversation, two completely different parts of the world, but it also kind of hurts us. Is sitting probably the worst thing that's hurting us in our modern lifestyles, in your opinion?
No, it's not necessarily the worst. Sitting is a natural position. It's a natural movement. There are diverse ways to sit, diverse positions of sitting. You don't have to always sit on a couch or on a chair. You can sit straight on the floor. Once you are on the floor sitting, there are different positions that you can sit in. And then there are diverse ways of getting up and getting down. And now that's supporting natural movement, good natural movement. Now, if you are sitting for hours a day, every day for years, you're sitting on elevated seats, so your legs are below your rear, then you probably have a rounded back, your rib cage is compressed, you don't have a good ample breathing. If you add to that maybe you have, the way you breathe is too fast and too shallow, you never get sunlight exposure, you never get more movement, more frequency of movement, more variety of movement, you're never outside, then it's not just sitting, it's easy to just point at sitting. It's sitting that's killing you. Well, certainly sitting is not helping, but what about your chronic lack of sleep? What about your chronic lack of fresh air? What about your chronic lack of sunlight? What about your chronic lack of nature? What about your chronic lack of movement, or more diverse, more frequent, more intense movement? What about your chronic lack of relaxation? You're always stressed. What about your chronic lack of healthy food, nourishing food, instead of industrial food that's poor in nutrients and that is probably loaded with all kind of toxic molecules that should never enter your body? You see, there's much more to being healthy or being unhealthy than just one aspect. So lack of movement, too much sitting, not enough sunlight, not enough fresh air, improper breathing, too much stress, not enough rest, not enough relaxation, not enough love, not enough, community, not enough laughter, all kind of things are going to take a toll on your function, on your health, on your well-being, on your energy levels, and on your enjoyment of life.
I love that. So well said. I agree so much. All of those things need to be kind of connected. Sometimes you need to start in a certain place, and maybe the exercise is where you get started on your health journey, and that then leads you to better eating or vice versa, whatever. But yeah, I think all of those are so critically important. If for somebody who didn't have a lot of access to things and diverse ways to move outside, what would you say to somebody who wanted to start a movement practice inside?
Well, that's a good point, because first off, moving naturally is obviously wonderful and very potent for health, for function when you do it outside, because the benefits of just being outside. But at the same time, movement behavior, the way you move and the way you can exercise through those natural movements, that's the idea, is that you can find in the variety of those natural movements a complete way to exercise, regardless of where you do the movements. So it can be outside, it can be inside, it can be in a natural, uncontrolled environment, completely wild environment. It can be in a controlled environment that can be both inside or outside. So as a matter of fact, when you begin, you probably want to learn the movements in an environment that is comfortable to you, that's not too intimidating, that's not too rough, that's not challenging, that's not, with all surfaces being rough and stable, as in natural environments. For instance, you can walk on all fours on a flat, stable, indoors environment. You can start like that. Then maybe you can balance on 2x4 boards. And this is the way we teach beginners. We teach a lot of beginners indoors. We even have licensed facilities to do that, because for a number of reasons, it's not always practical to take people outside in nature. It may have to do with the weather. It may have to do with the distance that needs to be, driven to get there. It may have to do with also finding in one environment, or a rather small environment, a diversity of props, of structures that enable natural movement. For instance, hanging, jumping, and landing. All kind of obstacles that can be designed to make you move naturally in a very diverse way in one setting. Whereas when you go in nature, you may not find in one spot all the, let's say, the natural diversity of environment that you need, for instance, for hanging and climbing, or then jumping and landing, etc., etc. So indoor training is very, very, very practical and convenient that way. And ultimately, once people have learned to move better, to have stronger bodies, healthier tissues, all the skills, the neurophysiological adaptations that are important for movement, efficient movement, then they can start bringing that new knowledge and that new ability to more natural, more challenging environments outside.
I love that. And I think it also just takes a little bit of creativity, especially in the beginning. You might not see places to hang or things to carry or things like that. But if you look around, I think most of us have some access to, a neighborhood park or, some rocks that are nearby. Like it does require a little bit of creativity, but have you found that it does become more simple for people to find ways to move naturally outside?
So that's also a very good point, Casey. Great question, because if natural movement was just like, oh, okay, I get it. So basically I move naturally. What about everybody just go in the woods and that's it? You're going to rediscover and unleash your full potential just like that, just spontaneously. No need for any method, any instruction, any coaching, any specific environment. Just do it like that. Well, most people will not have any idea what exactly to do and how to move and how to practice and how to stay safe doing that. Or it would take a lot of time. Whereas, time to begin with, or lack thereof, is a huge issue in today's society. Is that most people complain that they have very little time. So how many movements do you have to do? What are the movements that you've forgotten, the diverse variations and the diverse techniques, right? So this is what we teach. We teach all these diverse techniques, those diverse movement variations. And we do that using simple but effective props and drills. And this way you don't have to do the guesswork of like, okay, that's it. I took the whole day off or whole half day off. I'm in nature. I'm in some local park. What do I do now? And you're going to do that once maybe, and maybe you're going to try a movement. You're going to become energetic, and hopefully you will not hurt yourself, but that's a possibility. And then you might think, okay, I'm too old for this, or I don't know what to do. Well, this is why we have a method. We assist people in their rediscovery of their innate potential, and so that they can harness it in a very quick and effective way that is also safe.
For the listener, as long as you're not driving, make sure you go to the show notes. I'm going to link up the video from your website, which I believe is called The Workout the World Forgot. Is that correct?
Yes, this was actually, that very title was an idea from Christopher McDougall himself, who is the New York Times bestseller author for Born to Run, was the first book, and then the second one was Natural Born Heroes. So The Workout the World Forgot, it's a great video, very inspiring video that I did many years ago. And it's him, Christopher McDougall, that say, hey, why don't you call it that way? And I thought it was a great idea, because indeed there are so many workouts out there. When people think of how to exercise, there are so many possibilities, so many options. It can even be confusing. It's like, okay, which one is the best? Which one is the one for me? What are the benefits? Am I going to enjoy the training or not? and then you have trends, and you have, okay, the new thing, the new program. That idea of the workout the world forgot is that to train our very natural movements, the way we as a species, we human beings are meant to move, what if that was the workout, the elephant in the room, the way to exercise that is the most effective, the most appropriate, the most practical, the most useful? And why is that? Well, simply because it's universal, simply because it precedes all other programs that ever were created much later on in the history of mankind. Basically, in the last decades, we've invented so many new ways to exercise, and yet it looks like we completely forgot that we could become very fit and very capable physically, but just training the very movement abilities that we've inherited from a long history of men and women living in nature.
Mm. Yeah, well, the video is very well done. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. The diversity of different movements. And you can see kind of what you mentioned earlier, the utility of those movements, crouching underneath a tree, hanging from a tree, running up, a pile of loose rock. Like those things would be very useful to be able to do while you're out in nature. I remember the first time, I think I was taking a client through, we were doing a circuit back and forth, and one was hitting a tire with a sledgehammer, which, is fine, totally cool exercise. The other one was farmer carry, which is where you're carrying two dumbbells from one end of a field to the other. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm not producing calories. I'm not carrying and chopping firewood. I'm not carrying water. There's no use here. But you see in the video, like you swimming with a giant log, pushing it, down the river. And it's like, yeah, there is some use there. You're getting something out of it in a way that, you're right, we've kind of forgotten as a species.
Well, all I did was to replace those movements in the original context, or an idea of the original context, which is nature, a practical context that would require that you do those movements. So, like the farmer's carry, or hammering a tire with a heavy, or what's the name again? The mast, like whatever is the name of that object. This is great. I mean, those are really great movement. Okay? There are great movements. But indeed, they are a replication in a different context of natural movements that we would originally do in an actual practical, useful context. So indeed, instead of hammering a tire, you would actually chop wood. Instead of actually, carrying iron plates or kettlebells or something like that, you would actually carry buckets full of water or earth or rocks or whatever. So you would be doing that because it would be an actual labor, an actual chore, physical chore that you would need to do in the real life. The thing is, today, an overwhelming majority of people don't need physical labor to have food. Okay, so I'm not saying that there aren't out there millions of people who are working jobs that require physical labor. That's not what I mean. But the physical labor that they do, it does not. It's not related directly to making food. Okay, it's part of a job that gets you a paycheck, and then you can buy food with it. Whereas originally, when you would do the labor, that would be actually farming. That would be actually something like that. So my point is, not everybody, regardless of whatever is a person's, job, that it is includes some labor or full labor, physical labor, or it's all, like office or, other kind of work. There is a lot of time and energy that is spent working, and we all need to work because we all need to make a living, and that's great and necessary. But that leaves little energy for physical practice that would relate directly to our biological needs for movement, including and starting with natural movement. So if you think about it, not everybody will have the leisure to go exercise in nature, exercise their natural movements. And that's okay. This is the way it is. So what is it that we try to do? We try to understand what are the whole scope of movements that we normally are meant to do. Because like imagine a dolphin in a pond, in a swimming pool, or some other wild animal in a small enclosure. Clearly, they're going to do very little of the natural movements that they normally need to stay physically and mentally healthy. So what about us? So if we don't have time to be in nature, to do the real movements, we can always find a way to replicate those natural movements and do real and true natural movements, but in environments that may not be natural. So we want to somehow find a compromise where we're going to create those avenues for our physical expression that are going to be as close as the original naturalness, but that will also understand that there are limitations that have to do with our modern lifestyle.
Yeah.
And just to finish on that, when ultimately we have some free time and the leisure to go in the woods, to go somewhere in a natural environment by a river with rocks and trees and all hills and things like that, this is beautiful. But that's not always possible, and that's okay. And so our method provides a lot of solutions to enable the exercise of natural movements, to exercise naturally through those natural movements without necessarily having to go in nature all the time.
Yeah, that's very practical. For somebody who's listening to this and really wants to get started, what do you recommend for somebody to get started? How do they find somebody to learn the system from?
That is also, there's plenty of ways to do that. So number one is, the simplest is to pay a visit to MovNat.com. So it's MOVNAT, MovNat.com. It's by the way, we have a new beautiful website, and there's a newsletter where we send free workouts, natural movement workouts that you get in your email with links to videos that we have on YouTube. So that's a way to get started that will give you inspiration and ideas on, some of the movements you can start to do. We have e-courses that you can find and buy. Some are for, general natural movement. Others are more for mobility through natural movement or metabolic training through natural movement. And we also have online coaching. We have a certification. You can find our local certified trainers. We have thousands of them around the world. And of course, there's also my book, which can be bought online. And it's a great introduction, a lot of information here in the book.
Wow. Yeah, your website is beautifully done. I was just on there. It's amazing how many resources you've included for free. I was just learning about how to land a jump in a safe and effective way, which is pretty cool. Do you need a certain level of fitness to begin doing this, or could somebody who hasn't worked out in many years just get started with this as well?
Well, it's not at all the case. Anyone can start, anyone can learn. Again, everybody got the foundation of natural movement in them. Basically, anyone's body is designed for human natural movement to begin with. So you're made for this, okay? Everyone is made for this. And so the point of having a method too is that we provide progression, a starting point with gentle progressions so that you can, reacquire and reignite that potential in a very effective and enjoyable fashion, also a safe way. So there's no need to be fit to become able to move. You learn how to move with efficiency, with good form, and you become fit in the process.
Wow, I love that. I love how you have put that all into one system to help us learn this kind of stuff. This has been an amazing conversation. If you wanted to leave the listener with one simple tip that they could walk away from this conversation with, what would that one tip be?
Well, if you are a parent and if you watch your kids, if they're young kids and they play a lot, they do all these movements, well, maybe why don't you go ahead and participate a little with them and see what you can do, see how you can move. That could be a good idea to get a good sense of, what natural movement is. That's a good idea. But just think of, just look at the movements that you do on a day-to-day basis. When you wake up, from the moment you wake up until the moment you go back to sleep, to bed, what has been your movement behavior? If you were to video yourself, no sound, just your movement behavior, what is it made of? 4 hours in a day. What did you spend doing with your body? And then maybe you may realize, oh, okay, what can I do to add to that more variety of movements, more diversity, more frequency of movement? And that's a good start. So maybe the best start is to just look at it that way. Look at what's there, what is there in your day-to-day physical behavior that's there, and what is it that is missing? And if you realize that a lot is missing, then it's maybe a good idea to start implementing, reacquiring a good number of diversity of movement in your day-to-day physical behavior. And that's natural movement. That's how it starts.
I love that. What a great tip and what a great way to end this conversation. Erwan Le Corre, where would you like people to go one more time to find you and your work and connect with you?
Well, there is MovNat.com to begin with. MovNat.com is the official website for everything Movenat and natural movement. And then also I've been developing a new method called breath hold work, which does not imply movement, but it's in fact a meditation. So it's about learning to downregulate, learning to understand self and regulate self through both breathing and, most importantly, through breath holding, which also requires progressions and understanding. And this is the new method I've been teaching, and it's extremely effective. And the word is already out, and there are a lot more people are asking about it and wanting to learn with this.
That's great.
Learn about them.
That's great. Wow, that's awesome. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Erwan, thank you so much for all of your work, for coming up with this system, helping us move more and encouraging us to get outside and move like humans. We really appreciate you and your work and for taking the time to come on to our show today. We are very grateful for you.
Well, likewise, Casey. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for listening.
Absolutely.
Have a great day and be safe.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.